The question that I think many people would like to ask is, how is that independence to be preserved when the big bear is just the other side of the border and the country is so heavily dependent on Russia?
Very many people, both in Russia and in the Western countries, would like us to re-enter Georgia as it was before, but of course it was Stalin and Beria who forced us into Georgia in the first place. It is not possible to resolve any conflict or a complicated post-war situation if only one side is being heard. The European Union, European Parliament and other international institutions alike are listening only to Georgia. But according to the position of the United Nations Organization, there are two sides in the conflict, Georgia and Abkhazia.
That was a very well argued statement, and I think it puts the Abkhaz case very well. I would like to see you talking to a meeting of the United Nations, and if you could give us a version of that speech. It's something that deserves to be heard at the United Nations.
Remembering the days of Stalin, and well aware that by 1989, the 93,000 or so Abkhazians who then lived in Abkhazia represented a mere 17.8% of their republic's population, the Abkhazians responded to the invitation issued by Gorbachev under his policy of glasnost and voiced their grievances about life within Georgia. They did this largely in response to the ugly and rampant chauvinism which erupted in Georgia in the late 1980s and which threatened various minorities living within what was still the Georgian Soviet Socialist Republic. The Abkhazians' determination to take control of their own destiny back into their own hands by purely peaceful means was met only by armed assault from Eduard Shevardnadze's Georgia on the 14th of August 1992. It is the 15th anniversary of that invasion which is being commemorated here today.
In this hard time for our fatherland, I appeal to each citizen, whatever nationality he is, to stand up in defense of Abkhazia. We are invincible in such unity.
Now let us listen to the words of those who actually fought in the war.
That time, what I was witnessing was, well, the collapse of the Soviet Union. All those permanent rallies in the time of Gamsakhurdia at a certain moment made me, a young guy, start all of a sudden to think, why should anybody humiliate me in this way, raising doubts about my living here on the land of my ancestors? And I, for instance, remember very well the feeling of foreboding that there would be a war. In any case, there were the events of 1989 when already blood was spilt. At different times in the history of the Georgians and the Abkhazians, after all, in principle we have been neighbours already for centuries. Things took a different course. And I do hope that this gloomy part of our history will sooner or later be over, and that, banal as it may sound, wars do end sooner or later, and peace is restored. First of all, the huge losses among people we were close to. These are incurable wounds, incurable. The only thing that might assuage them is creative activity. They are wounds which bleed till the end of one's life, quite literally. There were very many instances of maiming by mines in my unit. Even now, when I enter a meadow, all of a sudden I forget myself and think, mines? Even now, after all these years, yes, a full 15 years have passed.
Many places were to suffer destruction during the course of the war between Georgia and Abkhazia in 1992-1993. But the village of Eshera was always going to be a prominent target. One reason was that it stands virtually on the front line, separating the Georgians from the Abkhazians to the north of Sukhum. The second reason is that it happens to be the native village of the then leader of Abkhazia, President Vladislav Ardzenba. Behind me stands what was the village school, and the results of constant shelling are clear for all to see. Of course, the main tragedies in a war are associated with the killing and maiming of its human victims. And it should not be forgotten that during the war with Georgia, the Abkhazians lost no fewer than 4% of their population. However, on the 22nd of October 1992, a particularly vicious act of cultural vandalism, which was quite calculated, took place on the grassy plot behind me. Standing here at the time was the Abkhazian Research Institute of History, Literature and Language, and housed within it was a very precious archive. That night, Georgian occupiers torched the building. The aim of their arson was to erase documentary proof of the very presence of Abkhazians on Abkhazian soil, thereby facilitating Georgia's claims to the territory. When firefighters arrived to douse the flames, they were prevented from doing so at gunpoint.
This sequence tells the story of the liberation of the Abkhazian capital Sukhum from Georgian occupation.
With the recapture of their capital, Sukhum, effectively the war ended on the 27th of September 1993. Lenin had already been removed from his plinth in front of this former administrative center of Abkhazia. In recapturing this building, the Abkhazians had to destroy it, and it has remained in this state since the end of the war.
Well, one of the things that I've seen which has been sad has been a number of small enterprises, even quite large factories. Up in Forcelli, the coal cleaning plant was completely out of action, and I believe there's other fairly large industries that are just not working now. What chance is there of getting them up and running?
During the Soviet period, unjustifiably large industrial objects were constructed. The aim of this was to import manpower to these enterprises from Georgia. In other words, it was a kind of pump for pumping in a new population. Immediately after the war, no one was optimistic about restoring the tourist trade. But it happened nevertheless, and with every year the stream of tourists grows. Now, in connection with the construction work ahead of the Sochi Olympics, there is great interest in the region, and we have already received many offers to restore and develop here the production of bricks, cement, etc. All these will be in great demand, and there is no doubt that Abkhazia, one way or another, will be involved in the project.